Walking towards the residence of the Hughes, she tried to formulate an argument in her mind. She had always been adequate with arguments, never having trouble formulating arguments before, thanks to many years in debating at school, but at that moment, all her training in debating left her in the lurch, and words evaded her. Finally, reaching her destination, she decided to assess the situation and respond accordingly. They could either be highly aggressive or calm and gentle, so devising a plan of attack at such short notice with so many different variables wouldn't be simple, and the stress of the day was already taking a toll on her. She knocked at the door, tentatively at first, but when no one answered, a bit more insistently. Once again, no one answered, and she was half relieved that she didn't have to face the proverbial music again, but half disappointed she wouldn't be able to solve the mess and move on. It was late afternoon already, and she decided that she would see Rose, discuss the visit at the Hughes earlier that day, talk through methods of approaching the situation, and try them again a bit later. She walked slowly in the sunlight, loving the way that the soft sunlight warmed her skin, and remembered the warmth of Iago as he held her. She longed to be close to him, but reminded herself that she would be seeing him later. Smiling inwardly and spirits lifted, she walked up the few stairs to Rose's door, thinking of how naturally well Iago had the ability to comfort her. Opening the door, she heard voices and recognized them immediately. Please, please, Rose, you have lived with her these past few days. Speak some sense into that girl. Why won't she marry our Alex? Sian waited, with a bated breath for Rose's answer. Closing the main door gently, she crept into the living room and stayed in the passage out of sight, ready to slip out of the building if need be. Rose took some time to answer, and Sian assumed that it was either to think an answer through or calm herself before answering. She won't marry your Alex because you two basically bullied her into it, Rose snapped. Rose's pause was to devise an answer. She sounded too angry to have been calming herself down, Sian thought. Would you have married each other if you were bullied into it? Marriage between two people is a sacred covenant, and I won't have you scaring my guest in this way. You know that it's not safe outside this village, yet you scare her half to death. And if she runs, what then? Have you even contemplated the risks thereof? Are you willing to have her death on your conscience over the selfish act of you wanting grandchildren? Sian smiled softly to herself. Rose could be trusted and counted on, she realized. Knocking softly on the living room door, Sian attracted the attention of everyone. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes looked very distressed. Alex looked pitiful. And Rose all fired up and ready to fight for her honor. Good afternoon, Sian, Rose cooed. Please come in so that we can finally sort out this matter. Sian entered nervously and seated herself next to Rose. Everyone was looking at her, making her most uncomfortable. But she decided the best thing for her would not be to run and hide, as she desperately wanted, but to stay and fight for her right to choose to live her life as she saw fit. All her life she tried her utmost to keep the peace, make everyone happy in every way possible, and putting her needs far aside, even when helping others was to her detriment. Here was the one situation where she could change all that, and Seeing Iago's face in her mind's eye, she gathered the courage to change. Breathing deeply in a voice that she considered as controlled as possible, Sian continued to fight her cause. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, I have just been in this town for a few days, and as much as I appreciate your enthusiasm in having me in this town, you haven't even bothered to get to know me. I might not be the right one for your son, and I believe that instead of just producing you grandchildren, your son should be deeply in love with the one he is to marry. You should also be able to say that in 10 years' time, you'll still like the woman. I have known many marriages that have been rushed, and have ended up in abuse and suicides, to name a few disasters. Alex, you are a good man, and I'm sure that you'll find someone that you'll be able to feel a connection to one day. It just might not be me. I don't even know who I am yet. How can I give myself to anyone when I'm an unknown to myself? What type of wife would I be to you? Please think about that. Silence ensued for a few minutes, interrupted by Lisa sobbing. You would have been the perfect wife for my Alex. Thank you for being so honest. Sian got up and hugged her. I'm really fond of you, your family, and Alex, and I really hope to see the crafts that the entire town is talking about. Would it be okay if I drop by sometime? You're always welcome at our home, Sian James. Mr. Hughes. Sian turned to shake his hand. I'm so sorry about all of this. Giles took her hand and shook it with vigor. I honestly wish we had approached you by another way. It doesn't matter, as long as peace has been made in the end. Sian was more relieved than Giles was that the encounter went well. Alex looked at her with respect in his eyes. She hugged him and kissed his cheek lightly. I'll never give up on winning your heart. She punched his arm jokingly. If you do, I'll have to punch you harder. The youths got up to leave, and Rose showed them out, their spirits much lifted. Goodness, what a morning, Rose declared as she sat down next to Sian. I agree. I thought it was going to be a little visit to Mommy and Daddy, but then that happened. Tell me the story from the top, Rose said thoughtfully. Sian told the story in as much detail as she could remember. She deliberated before telling her about the encounter with Iago, but then decided it was safe to tell Rose, especially after she had always defended Sian in her absence. Rose's eyes sparkled after Sian had finished. I always knew there was something special about you from the moment you arrived at my house. But I don't understand this mess at all. I am not used to all this attention, Rose. I don't know what to do with it. You mean Alex? Yes, Alex, as well as Iago. I don't understand it, Rose. Well, why don't you make your way to Prince Iago, and maybe he can help you figure this all out. Oh, yes, I was about to tell you, you knew. Of course, my dear. Prince Iago and I have been good friends since the day I arrived here. He had been here before me, and I must say that he has extremely good genes, as he ages extremely well. And his handsomeness cannot be looked either, as well as the fact that both of you seem to be head over heels for each other. Sian blushed. He's just been kind to me, the stranger in the town, Rose. No other reason. Besides, there's no way that a handsome man could fall for me. I mean, look at me. I'm not particularly built as a swimwear model. Maybe not, my dear, but you have the heart of an angel, and that sticks out more in a crowd than anything else. Now, please, go ahead, go to him. And, oh, before I forget, could you take this to him, please? Rose shuffled into the kitchen and came back with a container filled with cookies. Cashew nut cookies, it's his favorite. Giving Sian the container, she hugged her gently, and assuring her that she could visit him for as long as she liked, she ushered Sian out and closed the door. Another thing that Sian would struggle to get used to was another human being so open and honest as Rose was. She made her way to Iago's place, only to realize that she had forgotten his coat in her room back at Rose's place. All she could do was apologize to him for her forgetfulness and promise to bring it the next day. Iago opened the door almost instantly as she came up the path. She didn't bother asking how he knew that she was there. She just assumed that there were closed-circuit television cameras aimed at his front door. Curious. What have you brought with you? He inquired playfully. Something Rose gave to me. Apparently it's your favorite. Actually, it's my second favorite. After you, that is. Please, come in. He closed the heavy doors behind him and stood looking at her. In an instant, he was next to her, eyes never from her, stroking her cheek. Feeling overwhelmed, Sian withdrew and held out the container. Maybe you should take this before I drop it, she said. Of course. Oh, where are my manners? Please wait here, I'll be back shortly. He took the containers and disappeared. While he was gone, she struggled to still her shaking. What was he? And why did he have this effect on her? She would try and find out. Iago re-entered with a plate of cookies and 2 mugs of hot cocoa. Oh, forgive me, I didn't ask what drink you preferred, he apologized. Whatever you're offering, except for the brew of last time, please. He laughed heartily. Nervous, she took a small sip of her cocoa and found it to be most delicious. A Welsh brew? Oh, no, a recipe I borrowed from Rose, I'm afraid. It's delectable. What does that mean, delectable? Oh, extremely good? Then I could say that you look delectable to me right now. Sian blushed and looked away, consciously deciding she had misunderstood his meaning, even though she desperately wanted to believe that he meant it. No, it only applies to things you can eat, unless you were planning to eat me. Oh, goodness no. Smiling, he picked up one of the cookies that Rose sent. This is delectable? He asked, questioning. It certainly looks so, she laughed. They continued in light conversation, just enjoying each other's company until it started to become cold in the room. Sian suppressed a shiver and Iago jumped up and started the fire. I see that nothing misses your eyes either, she said, and when he looked at her with question in his eyes, she added, both you and Rose alike, both sharp as arrows. She guessed that she would have to explain the synonyms to him, but she didn't care. As long as she could hear his voice and look into those deep, dark pools of his eyes. I have become accustomed to the cold. I don't get many visitors here, he explained. Why is that? She asked, taking another sip of her hot cocoa. I suppose I'm just different to them, different habits, different lifestyle, just simply different. She leaned in closer to him. I don't think that is the case at all, she whispered. He looked at her with longing, then got up unexpectedly. Let's go to a warmer room, he suggested. Her eyes followed him as he left the room, and her heart sank as she lost sight of him. Still looking in the direction that she had last seen him, she saw his head pop around the wall, and he smiled at her. Would you please join me? Slightly nervous, she followed him. She trusted him completely, which was also strange, but decided to enjoy it while it lasted. Holding out his hand to her, she walked towards him and tentatively took his hand. Wrapping her hand in his bigger hand, he smiled at her and led her down a long passage. She admired the stonework of the walls, slate, placed perfectly, so deeply polished she could almost see her reflection by looking at the walls. My father took great pride in the elegance of this house, and I saw no reason to change his habits. Well, of course I've had assistants, but that's another story altogether. He led her to his bedroom, and she stopped at the door. His four-poster bed hung with heavy black velvet ties with silver tassels. His bed covered with deep red velvet duvet. The velvet carpet looked unworn, even though it must have been there for many years, but she decided not to question that. Rose mentioned earlier that she had a new carpet installed, so maybe he had the same thing done in that room. The failing light gave the room a soft ambiance, almost as if she would enter into a dream just by stepping in the room. Please come in, he said from inside the room. I mean you no harm, it's simply just a warmer room. Once again, she decided to trust him and entered the room. Shivering again of nervousness, she walked towards a fireplace that was placed opposite the bed. Mistaking her actions for cold, he invited her to sit on his bed with him. Slowly she walked towards him, crawled onto the bed, and was immediately enveloped in his big, strong arms. Now, isn't this better? He asked, rubbing her arms and her back. She just closed her eyes and enjoyed being held by him. Iago, could I ask you a question? She said. Anything. Tell me about yourself. Where you from? Where you grew up? Anything. I wouldn't want to bore you with history. No, please. I really want to know. As I don't really remember anything about myself, I'd like to learn about you. Iago released her slightly, looked at her face, and saw in her face that she was serious. And then he held her again. I was born in a small town in Wales called Knighton, and come from a long line of people who call themselves royalty. I don't really care for such responsibility, but I was born with this title, so I carry it as a load on my back. My mother was a beautiful, gentle woman named Lydia. She was the most gracious person that I ever knew, always ready to assist anyone in need. My father, however, was the complete opposite. Lucius was his name, a cruel man, ready to flog or punish at a moment's notice. We used to say that his cruelty was due to the fact that he was forced to fight wars from an early age, but my mother always used to say that it made no difference what a man was dealt with in his life. He still had the choice to choose the person he would become. You still have wars in Wales? That was a very long time ago. Your mother sounded like an incredibly wise woman. She was. You would have loved each other. Where is she now? She died in childbirth to her third child. It would have been a girl, as she had always wanted. But that's impossible. With the medical technology available today, she wouldn't have died. It was a long time ago, Sian, and nobody could have saved her. She just bled and bled and bled. Sian looked up at him. You were there, weren't you? You saw. Yes. How old were you? 16. Oh, I'm so sorry, Iago. Silly girl, he smiled. You didn't do anything wrong. He held her firmly to him again. After her death, everything changed. It was as if something froze inside my father, and he was a fraction of the man he used to be. Then one day he announced to my elder brother and me that he had been sent by the king to this land and he wouldn't return. We both thought that he abandoned us, and part of us were happy. But he was our father, and no matter how cruel he had been, that fact remained so. We lived our lives as expected until many years later the king sent for my brother, and I lived alone. Didn't you ever marry? I didn't ever feel the need to. He took off his cloak and wrapped it around her, and warmed at the fact that she snuggled up towards him. She fit him perfectly, he thought. Then one day the king sent for me and told me what had happened to the town, and said I was the last hope, and I left Wales never to return. Do you miss your country? Sometimes I do, but I've been dealt with these cards, and I should play the best I can, as my mother would say. What exactly happened in this town? Has anything out of the ordinary happened to you since you've come here? She thought carefully and decided not to tell him about the dream in the car before finding the town. She was still troubled by the memory of the dream, but told herself it was just an overactive imagination that caused it, nothing else. No, why? She lied. If anything strange does happen, then you're ready to know the story of this town. Please, trust me on this. They continued holding each other as they both warmed up. Gently, she lifted his shirt and slowly glided her hands over the skin on his back. He stiffened as she passed her fingers over the welts on his back, scars of his father's cruelty. She could only guess at the amount of pain that he had suffered in his lifetime. After some time he relaxed and held her even tighter. Her stroking ceased as sleep started taking over her body. I never felt the need to marry until I met you, Sian James. Half hearing his words, she smiled. That's beautiful, she said, as she drifted to sleep.